Good day to you. A majestic blue barge for the discerning gentleman of the 90s. 16 foot of pure wedginess, the Rover 800 facelift is a car that I've not driven on the road for about 20 years. And it is something I'm very much looking forward to. Not because it's just an 800, but because it is a Vitesse. Yes, the Vitesse. That is the fast version of the Rover 800. You may think a car of this size from the 90s with a 2-litre engine in is going to be a bit sluggish, but actually you would be surprised. Even the normally aspirated version is actually quite nippy, but with the turbo it's good. The T-Series engine develops about 136 horsepower, but then with the turbo slapped on it, it is 197. So it's quite a good, hefty, purposeful turbo that really does something a jalfrezi with a whole load of extra chilies bunged in. But I'll come back to that afterwards. Let's just have a look around before we take it out for a drive. Obviously, I am a Rover man. I like these cars. I'm going to like this. I like the 800. For me, the booted Mark II is the handsome car. Awful lot of swage lines and detail everywhere you go. And then we come to the front where they did the facelift, and I just think it really makes this car, oh gosh, it's just nice. To describe a car as just nice doesn't really do it justice. It's a really well proportioned car. Everything about it is just proper Rover, and everything about it is just that. Yeah, I like it so much that I can't even think of the correct word for it. This being the Vitesse model, it has the 17-inch wheels that at the time looked quite big. Now they don't look particularly big, but somehow they do on this car. And that will be because Rover didn't stick around long enough to get ruined by some of the fashionable huge wheels that just made everything look like a toy. Looks are subjective, but I don't really see how anybody could view this car and not think, that's a handsome fellow, that. Rather typically for a car of this era, the interior room isn't massive, but actually, as long as you sat in the front and not the back, it's fine. And of course, look at these seats, look at these carpets, look at these door cards. These lovely proper leather door cards with courtesy lights and bits of detail there. The kick panel with the Rover on, proper carpet, half leather Recaro seats. The fuzzy foamy door shut bits. This car has an awful lot of attention to detail. Door shut sounds isn't a particular talent of 90s Rovers, but I've heard worse. The 800 boot is huge, really. Obviously you could live in here should you find yourself homeless. This is the bit you want to see, isn't it? The engine. For those that like to see engines. And we can see down there we have a big turbo and some pipes, but nothing fancy, nothing aftermarket. It's all standard, except for that. That looks like it might have come from a Volvo. This being the Mark II with a facelift, it has an extra airbag as well as one there, which does take away the lovely little tea tray. Original bits everywhere, original radio, vents that aren't smashed, and even a dashboard that hasn't lifted an awful lot. 4 electric windows, electric sunroof, wood bits, leather bits, more wood bits. That, even the headlining is intact. It's quite a nice car, this actually. The 800, of course, was the Rover flagship big car, and what always confused me is they must have thought, it's still not quite long enough, and that's why they put these extra extended bits of bumper out the back and the front. Without these bits, this car would literally be knocking on for a foot shorter than it actually is already. Elegant looks, huge back doors that look almost limo-like. These wraparound bits along the tops of the doors, they stopped doing at one point because thieves would simply grab hold of this and bend the door out to get in. Rover's emblem, of course, is a ship. Well, this car isn't a ship, but it is a barge. Because this is the Vitesse rather than the Sterling model, it means I've got to adjust my own seat. No electric seats in this one. No. You've got to use a manual thing. You've actually got to manhandle the slider. The 800 is not a sports car. It may have quite a pokey engine in it, but it's not designed to be anything that handles particularly excitingly. In fact, they always reminded me of driving a pencil. That's down to the length of them and the fact that they're quite narrow. Because it's basically just a rebadged Honda Legend, they had to keep it a certain width for tax reasons. And then a few years later, Honda did another Legend that was quite a bit wider and bigger. Because it's narrow though, and because you've got plenty of visibility out the front, actually driving it's as easy as any other Rover really. Parking is a slightly different matter. In fact, when I had my 800, I always used to see other 800s about the time, because there were still a few, and they always had scuffed up bumpers. And that's not surprising with the amount they stick out. Just got a nod off of somebody then. I'm not sure whether he was approving of the car or thinks he knows me. Almost 20 years ago when I owned one of these, and the two that I had, the first one never really worked properly and it was a bit of a shed, and the second one was a lovely looking car, but it had a boost issue, so I never really got to experience it properly. But I would say that the low down thump was almost diesel like. I wonder if this will be the same. I certainly like to have a test drive in a car and do it quite gently, because the majority of the time you will be driving your car gently, and as far as get up and go is concerned, third gear is a bit more important than the second. So here we go, third gear. And it pulls along quite swiftly actually. What it doesn't have is that kind of scrabble for grip like you'll get in a 200 with the same engine, because quite simply it's a lot smaller and a lot lighter. Could go into second though, I suppose, just as a little treat around this bend here in gear. It doesn't sound turbo, blimey, I tell you what though, it does pick up really rather well, but in a deceptive fashion. Yes, it kind of hides you from the sensation of acceleration somewhat. It doesn't feel really exciting or really scary, it just gets on with the job and doesn't really concern you with it. No wonder they used to call it the Gentleman's Express. I can tell you that this one has 125,000 miles. It still drives like a really decent modern car. It will obviously keep up with any of the traffic anywhere without any issue whatsoever. The other thing is that this car will be going for sale quite soon. So if you want it, you could actually buy it. Just remember, it's not my car, it's somebody else's. There was of course a point where the Gentleman's Express was a V8 or even just a V6, but then of course they found that they could make just as much power out of a 4-cylinder, and it would be a lot more economical as well. And that is one of the things from my experience with the T-Series engine, that it is actually a very economical engine for the amount of power you get out of it and the time that it was produced. I like it. I am a fan of the T-Series. And I'm a fan of this car. It's very much the kind of thing I would be comfortable driving every day. It's great. It doesn't drive with the same depth as the 600. It doesn't handle like the 445. And it certainly doesn't have the same nimble character of the 25. That's always my favourite. And then again, it doesn't have quite the classic looks of the 75. But it is an exceedingly well-made car. In fact, what I forgot to do was the PAT test all over the dashboard. I don't need to. I remember what it's like. Let's launch it up the hill. Launch it up the hill. I just remembered something. I did have a little drive in a white Vitesse about 6 years ago that somebody had for sale, and I just missed it on the eBay listing. But that one I've been asked about with, and gosh, it was quick. But that's the thing with this engine. These T-Series engines can take an awful lot of tuning. I mean, an awful lot. You think you can get quite a bit out of some engines, but these, I don't want to make myself sound daft, but I'm sure it's something like 600 brake, because it's actually just a cast iron block. It's very much an old style engine, and it's very heavy, but the potential is really there. There are a couple of little niggles with this car, of course. It's got a few rusty bits coming through. It's got a few dents. It's definitely got a wheel bearing on the way out somewhere. But other than that, it's a very good example. Slightly extended test drive because I just fancy driving it a bit more. Yeah, it's not necessary, but it is for me. It is for me because honestly, I feel at home in this car, as I do with most Rovers. The nostalgia feeling is there with an 800, where it isn't so much with other Rovers, because I've had them all this time anyway. So I can drive around in an old car and not feel nostalgic until I get into an 800. And yeah, I kind of want this feeling to keep going on for a little bit longer. Driving this car up into the estate where I used to live, yes, what an amazingly nostalgic feeling I am having with this car. Weird actually, because when I had one of these before, I lived in a different part of the country, and my only connection with an 800 was with a friend whose parents had one. Somehow this car looks at home in Milnrow though. Maybe it's because there's so many other Rovers about. Gosh, what a tall man he is. The Rover 800 isn't a funny car at all. It doesn't make you laugh, but it does make you smile a bit. And it certainly makes me smile. And I definitely like it. And I always will. What conclusion can I come to here? I like the Rover 800. Not that one. This one. This is the one we're talking about. It still looks like a cut above the rest. And you know what's really impressive? I've done this whole test drive without mentioning Alan Partridge once.